Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me for today's panel, Stepping Out of the Narrative. Now, this year has been such an interesting one. It feels like the entire world has been stepping out of the global narrative, and we're still really searching for something new. And we're going to come back to that later. But for now, we're going to look at the narrative in terms of being classically trained Indian dancers and making new work. Now, just to give a little bit of background for this, late 2019, the Arts Council actually commissioned a mapping study of South Asian music and dance. And the sort of initial results of that have been shared quite recently. And it was interesting because one of the big pieces that came out was still this conversation that's been going for decades about traditional versus non-traditional work, Margam work versus contemporary work. So I wanted to start really by looking at those labels and to ask all of you, as performing artists and as practicing artists, how do those labels fit? Are they even important? Do you just find them irritating, but maybe inconvenient, but necessary? Or do you wish they would just go away? How does it work for you? So Amina, I'm going to come to you first and then Mathangi for this question. Amina, let's start with you.
So this is the question about tradition versus non-tradition, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. I think tradition really lays on with culture. So if culturally what's happening, culturally we're moving all the time. And if culture is changing, then we change. For example, for women, place in culture have changed dramatically over the years. Particularly in the subcontinent as well, in Indian women, and particularly British women, British South Asian women. And I do feel like in terms of dance, in terms of like say Kathak, which is what I practice, it doesn't really have a room for it, I don't think, because culturally we're shifting all the time. I'll give you an example, say in Kathak, when we're doing Abhinaya, which is a huge part of all classical Indian style, and particularly in Kathak, where I do heavily lean on Abhinaya to create my work. I do believe, or perhaps I'm right to say, most of the gestural stuff created for women were by men in the past. Therefore, as a woman living in UK, I don't see that's how relevant to perform, like very coy, very meeky women, how they show their veil, how they go, oh, like, oh, I'm shy and all these things. We don't have that anymore. Women are stronger, women are independent, women are equal. I like to think that. So therefore, those kind of traditional, shall I say, old traditional, created probably by men, I don't feel they have a room for it anymore. And the other aspect of talking about whether the result of Arts Council's research, I never thought my dance style particularly was classical. It is contemporary because I live now, I'm practicing now, it's still alive, it's a live tradition, live form, it's still happening, it's not dead. And particularly Kathak is an improvisation form. And when you're performing Kathak, improvising, I would improvise different to my teacher did and another dancer would. So therefore, we are always shifting with it. If you're improvising, we're shifting with it. We can't say it's stagnant. Because if you're stagnant, then in a way, I think the understanding of what classical is something that stays pure or keep it as it is. And I also think classical is not a term that is an Indian term. I think it's a Western term that we borrowed and we are using it. So therefore, it doesn't really have a place here, you know. And particularly with the dance, look, we're here. We're not in India.
Right.
So therefore,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, so our dance will move on, dance will change because we share two cultures, for example.
Yes.
And also we live in a multi-culture, not really just two cultures. In India, I come from Bangladesh. you know, we don't have lots of different cultures living together. There are a few, but not lots like here. We don't, you know, we are not trying lots of different food other than maybe Chinese. In India, we have quite big Chinese culture in India. So we don't have a lot of ingredients with us. But here we have abundance. So therefore we are moving with time. But I mean, for myself, I look within Kathak to bring out from my own experience what Kathak is now. So those Mickey stuff, those things were created, you know, 70 years ago, let alone 500 years ago. You know, they don't speak to me at all.
Okay, wonderful. So the form is constantly evolving and always has been. Mathangi, let's go to you. How do these labels work or not work for you?
I think I have somewhat of a mixed feelings on that one, Vena. So I think personally, I do enjoy some of the very traditional pieces, you know, the beauty in the simplicity, or, you know, the Margam format. I quite enjoy them. But having said that, I do really like to challenge myself and, you know, try and create something new. As well as I think I look at it as developing my audience today, because my close circle of, you know, even if I took my own close circle of friends, I don't find most people sort of voluntarily going to a Bharatanatyam performance. So for me, it is, how is it that, what can I create to really make those people who wouldn't on their own go watch a Bharatanatyam performance to, you know, how can I pique their interest and create something that's keeping in with times. So I think that's how I look at it. And having said that, I like the you know, various adavas that we have in Bharatanatyam. They have so much scope. I've sort of started looking at the adavas or the steps in a very different way these days. So earlier for me, the adavas used to, you know, be those fantastic rhythmic fillers, or, you know, the nritta. They don't really mean anything in the previous choreographies. But for me now, I look at our Bharatanatyam adavas, and those shapes and patterns that they create are already saying something through that. They have meaning when I put a different context on top of it. So I think this really excites me. And yeah, so for me, while I do enjoy performing the traditional pieces just for my own pure bliss, I am quite, I like to take on a little bit of a challenge, and I want to reach that particular sector of audience who wouldn't on their own go and watch a Bharatanatyam performance perhaps.
Okay, wonderful. So you've touched on drawing in new audiences and that relationship of, you know, do we consider, and to what extent do we consider audiences as well? So, and you also spoke about nritta and, you know, the whole thing of using, maybe starting to deconstruct adavas and the traditional, the movement form, the movement pathways that we have been taught. So let's segue with that into looking at the creative process for you as dancers. So Arunima and Subba, I'm going to come to you for this. When we train, whichever classical form we train in, there's so much repetition of particular movements and so on. So everything gets very, very deeply embedded, and that gives us all an incredible foundation. When it comes to making new work, can you share with us a little bit about your personal creative process? And maybe touch on this word choreography and, you know, dance making. Subba, I know you have a lot of experience with making new work and doing really innovative work, and Arunima, I'm really keen to hear from you about Kuchipudi in particular, because you do so much to really champion this wonderful art form. Arunima, do you want to start?
Yes, so, you know, I just leading on from the previous question, so Indian classical dance forms, you know, because they are so embedded in culture, you know, and they permeate its history, it's very important to have that context while creating any work, whether you're creating classical or, you know, neoclassical or contemporary, whatever you may call it. And I think Kuchipudi particularly has a very interesting and interesting history, because it was only male Brahmins who were, you know, practicing, teaching and performing even the female roles. So because I've had I've been fortunate to learn from both a male guru and a female guru, I have, it has been very, very interesting to have, that mix of knowledge come to me. My own work in terms of creating has evolved and changed quite a bit. So when I used to learn in India, I used to, give some inputs into the choreography, and sometimes, my Guruji students used to ask him, why when she does Pranavakaram, why does it look different? Why have you taught her something different? And he said, I haven't taught her anything different. This is what she does, So it was always for me a process of evolving, maybe creating a little bit of a variation within what was allowed within the framework. Of course, when I moved to London, I was completely, inspired by what I saw. And I think that enabled me to really, create what I wanted to create. So I look at a creative, I look at the material that I want to create. And if I've been inspired by somebody's performance or something I've seen or a theme that excites me or provokes me, I bring in that material and that context into my choreography and creative process. And then I look at who I want to collaborate with, and I think that is a process of enrichment that I go through. So for example, I was really inspired, and it really broke the boundaries of what I used to create when I worked with Shobana Jaisingh on my piece Bandini, which was based on domestic violence, based on poems written by women in prison. And the material was so different. It was the text was different. There was nothing to start with, no music, and the theme was so powerful yet very delicate. So it was a very interesting process for me, and I made many mistakes. So Shobana would come into the room and look at it, and she was the dramaturg, and she would be, it's fine, go ahead, try things and fail if you want to, roll over, use floor work, jump. I'd never experienced any of that, and I was working with a contemporary dancer, and it really shifted the way I thought, because it was completely, I was working with an abstract narrative, and again I didn't understand what abstract meant at that time. So I think those kind of things now go a lot into my creative process, that if I'm looking at a movement, and you spoke about repetition, how within that repetition, what can I do? How can I bring in a variation? What is the accent? What is the embellishment? What can I do, and what has inspired me? And I just like to create honest work, and whether that honesty comes from the context or who I am today. Amina spoke about evolution, so I think I have evolved as a dancer. Somebody spoke to me that day and said, well, it's urban kuchipudi. Now I don't know what is urban kuchipudi or village kuchipudi or exotic kuchipudi or pure kuchipudi. I don't know. I have learned kuchipudi all my life, and I have learned from the best of teachers. Now if my own process and my own body has evolved because of what I see, because of who I am, well, so be it. This is what I create, and I create it with complete honesty, and I'm not ashamed of anything in terms of music. We're doing a choreography challenge tonight with Dance West, and we're working on a David Bowie song, and each of us are bringing in our own contexts and our own movements into it. So I just love to create, and I love to create with people and sometimes on people. So it has evolved both in terms of my solo repertoire as well as my group repertoire, as well as choreographing on others. And I like to be very democratic about it, because I think that is what enriches me. So I feel very excited about creating, and that's what keeps me going, the intellectual side of it, the creative side of it.
Wonderful. Honest choreography. That's really lovely. Subba, let's come to you.
So just to kind of give a background as to why the choreography kind of has taken the path that it has for me. So after, training at the Bhavan, I realized that I wanted to do something different with the form, not necessarily evolve it to a place where it's unrecognizable or whether you think about it in a contemporary context. I just wanted to do something different with the form. And that's when Mayuri Bunam and I got together and we started Angika. And we only started Angika partly for me. I just wanted to be a dancer. I didn't want to be a choreographer. But actually there wasn't much out there for me as a dancer. Really so few opportunities. So we kind of fell into this notion of choreography because we wanted to do something different and nobody was almost employing us to do that thing differently. So we got together and just looked, you know, the starting point was really looking at the traditional items within Amalgam and looking at them and looking at the dynamics of it, the speed, the choreography, when you suddenly had two dancers on stage, the interaction, and actually not so much deconstructing, but looking at the constructions within the forms, you know, actually looking at what made it what it is, what made a Jatiswaram performed as a solo art form in a particular way. And if you had two people on stage, you cannot ignore the other person. So how does the interaction shift the way in which you perform a very classical piece of dance? So that was a kind of starting point as to why we delved into that world of choreography, and almost feel a bit of a cheat calling it choreography because we weren't choreographing. We were just constructing differently something that existed in a very classical context and form. And then that led to being more sort of creative with the form. And then what started to happen is we were being inspired by things around us. We wanted to make work about something that we were both interested in, something that we both shared knowledge about. So we started to create work. So our first work was called Sudarshana, and we were actually really interested in the chakras in your body and the alignments. And actually each chakra was associated with so much physicality as well as color. There was sound, there was music, there was so much that it was just this rich bed of knowledge as a starting point to create work. But we had this, as you quite rightly said, Vena, this wonderful foundation, which is the form. The form was like the pillars, the foundation, the starting point for everything. So then we started to push the boundaries, started to think about the boundaries of the form and how you would push that. Again, not in a fusing with anything way, but purely starting with that. You know, bearing in mind, both of us were only trained in Bharatanatyam. I think I started doing evening adult classes at the place, level 1 contemporary. My God, I was useless. So it was that kind of, you know, you start, and then you kind of start to feel the body move in a slightly different way. And then we just started exploring, and then we continued to make work for 12 years that just was very much informed conceptually. It was the concept that informed the work that we created. And then after Angika, when I set up sadhana, for me, I have a science background, so suddenly the science started brimming up to the top. So that became conceptually the thing that was inspiring me to make work. So the process was very much driven by the rigor of the science. And for me, the reason I do what I do is the rigor of process. It's the rigor that comes with the form, the rigor that comes with the subject and the conceptual matter that I'm working with, and in the process. The process very much drives what the end product is. So, you know, one of the first things one of the first pieces of work I made was called the Shiva. And it was all about what makes us shiver, whether it's cold, whether you're surprised, whether you're in awe of something. And all of those, it's the kind of pinnacle of any emotion is that notion of the shiver. And that excited me to create a piece of work. And I worked with a neuroscientist called Morten Kringelbach, who's at Oxford University, and he and I worked together in the studio, and he'd be in the studio. So the process was very much driven and led by that sort of collaborative process between the dancers, the scientists, myself, and all the audiovisual artists, the lighting designers, so that we all start at this point. So for me, choreography is not driven, it can be a lonely process, but it isn't. Right at the heart from day one is where that collaboration starts, how it starts, who with, so everybody is involved from the inception of an idea for me. That's what feeds that choreographic process. And then I've kind of, you know, in the last piece of work I made was set into shipping containers. So I genuinely believe that Bharatanatyam, South Asian dance forms, you know, of all sorts, have a place in our society to tell stories we want to tell. Absolutely has a place. It is, you know, these are forms that are rich in expression, in abhinaya, they are rich in pure dance, contextually, in the way we use our bodies to tell those stories, our faces, the whole of our bodies, how we choreograph. So just as a last point, so the piece I made in the 2 shipping containers was all about exploring issues around mental health and young people. So I worked with the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services in Southwark in London with a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and worked for a really long time and put this piece of installation and took it to different science festivals around the country. And, you know, it was really quite interesting and the work was only a half-hour piece of dance, sat in 2 shipping containers with an audience that were right close up to you, maximum of 25 people. And that's giving people an intimate experience of the form, because it was and I was performing this, very much rooted in Bharatanatyam. But it's the fact that it was a very different way of looking at the form in a very tight space, a very dark piece. So I think that choreographically, I think for me, you can take it anywhere, anyhow. And I know we'll come to this, especially now. I think our form has an incredibly important role to play, and we're at a really important place with it.
Wonderful. That's really great, Subbaiah. I think you've given, for viewers watching, particularly I think young dancers watching, you've given so much inspiration there for them to think about how to approach the form while staying absolutely true and authentic. You don't need to give up any authenticity in order to look at how, I think one of the key phrases is how is it constructed? How are the udabas constructed, for example? You know, if you go into it in that way, then you can really start to open things up. And I think all of you have also touched on this idea of responding to what is around us. I mean, we live in a real world. Dance does not live in a vacuum. And I think this is a really, really key point. So Stella, I'm going to come to you in a moment actually to ask you about Kalakshetra and that, you know, to frame that in a very traditional way and then come back into London. But Maryam, I do come to you first. I know that you have said that you don't have much experience of choreographing, so I'm asking this for you as a dancer, as a dancing body. I know that you worked and performed in the Odyssey ensemble work called Sacred Spaces, and that was a very contemporary, that was a very new piece. So in terms of your body, your dancing body, how did you experience that process of moving in a different way? And I'm asking this, I suppose, because I think one of the things, and maybe we can all relate to this, is that when you start creating new movement pathways and patterns or performing new movement patterns, sometimes it can feel to the body like you're not doing real dance. Do you know what I mean? That you're not really dancing, that there's an awkwardness there. Was it like that for you, or was it exciting? How did your body experience this new work?
Thanks, Vena. So just to clarify, the piece was called Sacred Shapes, just to say. But yeah, it was a fantastic process actually, because, you know, we were there. So Katie Ryan was the choreographer in that, for that piece. And so we were kind of involved also in when she was also creating the piece. So, you know, it was quite a not collaborative process, but, you know, to see how it would fit together in space. Because you can have an imagination about how something's going to look, but then once you actually get 4 bodies actually doing it together, you know, you have to constantly be making adjustments and seeing how everything fits. So in terms of how it was feeling in my body, so I really understand what you're saying about how it doesn't feel like you're dancing, because we're so used to that repetitive process and embedding those movements by doing it over and over again. So I think for me, it was more about how to make these movements feel alive. So that was more about how I started to relate to the movements. You know, I'm quite fortunate that my kind of training background is quite strong, I like to think. So I think it was much more about, okay, how do I use the technique that I've learned, and how do I apply that to these movements to keep them fresh and alive, and also how we respond to each other, because, you know, it's not a solo piece, it was a 4-person in the round performance. So it's also very much about responsiveness. And, you know, I love what you're saying about how dance is a response to our environment, because, you know, I really believe that. And I believe that what makes a really powerful performance is that kind of very present and very responsive to, you know, every single moment that's happening in your body and also around you. So yeah, it was a really great process, and yeah, very living it felt.
Yes, and I think that the thing about bringing it alive, that's really interesting, because that we come back to the contemporary traditional sort of dichotomy that sometimes I think does feel very false and forced. The truth is that the tradition is always alive. It's always living in the bodies of the performers and the practitioners, and it is always evolving. And I recently interviewed Subathra Subramaniam, and I recommend actually for everyone watching, do go and have a look at that interview, because it's a masterclass in creativity. It's on my YouTube channel and on my Instagram. And she speaks there a little bit about the beginning of her journey with the Karanas. Now, of course, when we think about Paduka, we think, you know, she's sort of part of the grand tradition. But when she started her research on Karanas and started introducing these movements into her performances, she met with such criticism and such a backlash from the establishment. So, but of course now she's become part of the grand tradition, and indeed has influenced dancers from all different backgrounds and different dance styles. So it's really a case of today's rebellion, today's innovation becomes tomorrow's tradition. And I think on that note, Stella, I want to come to you. And can you tell us a little bit about how is tradition framed at Kalakshetra? And in particular, how did Rukmini Devi frame tradition? And how has that influenced your work?
Right. Rukmini Devi was very fluid. I mean, the tradition, like all of you have said, it's not rigid, it's not static. So it is something which is, even though, you know, even if you repeat something many times, each time you do, it is different. So I think what has come across after chatting with them, you know, listening to everybody, the process, the perception, I think all these are incorporated in tradition. And what I understand from my stay in Kalakshetra for 16 years, it is a unity with the essence of the form, unity with the essence of the inside and outside. And also Kalakshetras, I mean, we were not taught formal choreography at all. This word choreography doesn't exist within the South Asian narrative and the Bharatanatyam narrative. And, you know, when you are learning dancing also, because it's a solo dance, you are learning to, because you're a solo person who is embodying different roles, it's more about your engaging with the outside and inside. And it's more engaging with the senses and the interpretation you're making with it. That's the prominence. So it's more on the embodied performer, more on actually understanding if an Aramandi is, what are the implications of the Aramandi in your body? What is the essence inside you when you're creating it? And, you know, and then when you're doing Jatiswaram, there are other things like the music. Where is the impulse? Is it the impulse in you know, with swara, whether you're going with the swaram, whether you're going against the swaram. So, you know, so these things you learn because you observe, you watch her in choreography, because she has choreographed a lot of, you know, when I was there, she's choreographed stuff on me as well. So you're really alert when she's mixing the movements together. And her impulse was always music. It was always music and text. So, you know, the Indian aesthetics, the poetic aesthetic is what? It is about listening to, there are theories, there is the speculative theory, it's embedded in all these theories. So this whole, the text tinkles your imagination. So you won't your Rama is not static. You bring layerings to the word. Rama is just a word. So these are metaphors. So you are basically creating, she used to create movements and colors all the time. And from one dance drama to the other dance drama, it was completely different. So there was no, so she was also growing. So for example, she saw Ramani had done Odissi. There was an Odissi, the Odissi performance. So at that time, my teacher had choreographed Damayanti Swayamvaram on me. And then Ate, she was so inspired by the Odissi concert. She actually choreographed movements, which you would, if you look at it, you would think, oh, this is informed by Odissi. So yeah, so she was absolutely fluid, not at all static, lived in experiences. The process was very important, and the senses, because it was all about your inside and outside. So that's
amazing.
about pedagogy of choreography, if say that.
Yes, yes. Thank you. So before we move on to the next piece, I just want to check in with all of you. Is there anything, any other comment that you want to add? Maybe anything you want to bounce off what somebody else has said?
No,
sorry.
Go on.
Amina, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Hi. Yeah. I totally agree with Stella about about choreography doesn't exist within South Asian dance, Indian dance. And I've been struggling over the years to find another word for it, another term for it, because I think again, who said that? Somebody said it about it was Subathra, about the construction. You're constructing what's already there, and the way I'm looking at also when I'm creating work is not going at all outside of the form. Form has everything. It's so much depth in the form. Layers and layers and layers. And when you actually go into the studio, sit there, and because I work with characters, so all my pieces has characters. So I look at how I can use the form Kathak to find the right pattern or right melody or movement for the particular character. And again, working with the emotion a lot. So all my work is embedded in emotional journey. So every character has the journey, whether they're a negative character or good character, bad character, they have to go through that emotion. So yeah, looking at choreography is something become very conflicting word for me, because it is a Western concept, choreography. We don't have that because we have forms that we learn all this composition-based stuff in Kathak, for example, and this composition I use to make my work. So this composition already exists. It's not I made them up. So therefore, looking at choreography becomes quite a conflicting area for me. So it's been quite interesting listening to all of you and understanding or getting reassurance on that word. So I think it's something. I think it's a dialogue. I think should carry on anyway, because it is an area where we have to find our own voices and not necessarily follow the Western concept of what it is. Sorry, I've got a tickle in my throat.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Stella, did you want to add something?
No, I mean, Amina has just clarified it, so yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, Arunima.
I think one of the key what should I say, triggers for me was also to break stereotypes and extend the stereotypes. Now, I understand, I mean, even within Kuchipudi, Kuchipudi has evolved. So I think, choreography has been an integral part, because what, our older gurus created in the villages, and then when it moved to Chennai and then it got extended into, cinema, there was a lot of choreographic element. But of course, in terms of stereotypes, even till today, I'm asked, okay, so can you come into a Kuchipudi performance? So do the Tarangam. So for me, it was a trigger that Kuchipudi is beyond a Bhamakalapam, beyond Tarangam. It is beyond the Aharyam, because even, when I have performed in, say, Chennai, people will be like, where is the Jada? You say you did Kuchipudi, but where is your Jada? And, for me, it was not just about wearing, that extra jada which made it Kuchipudi, or having lots of flowers, it was about the technique and being, faithful to the framework of the technique. So for me, that was, I would say, the trigger of really looking at what I have, whether it was an old piece or, something, which we've all spoken about, something I wanted to respond to, and then see what do I have within my framework to work with, how can I create that? But it was the trigger, I would say, was to, break this stereotype that these are just the 2-3 things that I can do in Kuchipudi, and that's what makes, me a good kuchipudi dancer. Of course, that is part of my traditional repertoire, but you know, if I want to extend myself and the form, I want to use the tools that my form gives me to be able to create.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so Mathangi?
Sorry, Vena, I was just going to add, yeah, I think it's all about just creating that new structure, the dance structure for your piece. So it's about taking that concept and creating the dance structure, but using your existing foundation of whatever movement or vocabulary that you use. I think that's, for me, that's how I think about it.
Of the form. I mean, you know, we kind of leave behind the poetics of the form. So, which kind of is the main, it underpins the whole, you know, we can call it multiple names as traditional culture or whatever, but there is a aesthetic poetics of the form you can't get away. And what it is that it gives you the fluidity to translate in any way what you want, whether you want to do a modern work with, you know, any refugee women or anybody, it gives you that license, and that's my understanding. It's that essence.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so on that note, let's move on to the next piece, which is really looking at this particular moment in time that we are inhabiting and how we move forward here, because 2020, let's face it, so far has been a really weird year. So what I want to know from all of you is, how have you responded to that weirdness? How has it impacted you artistically and financially as performers? And how have you responded? What are you doing? Subbaiah, should we come to you first? And maybe you can speak both as a performer and also in your role as academy.
Yeah. So I always joke that when I signed up to be artistic director of academy, this is not what I signed up for. I did not expect to start in January and then go into COVID lockdown within 2 months. So suddenly, you know, everything I said I'd love to do has just gone completely out of the window. However, what I will say is that what it's given, it's not just obviously COVID, it's the whole movement around anti-racism, anti-discrimination, about diversity, inclusivity, all of these. I know they're all buzzwords, but they're actually words that we all, I think, as artists in this sector need to think about. So, you know, the arts is not going to be the same anymore. It's not going to be what it was. It's unsustainable. It cannot be the way it was. So I think, you know, for me, we all as artists, whether you are a South Asian artist, whether you're a contemporary dancer, whether you're a hip hop dancer, whether you're a singer, I think all of us are at a point where we all have a role to play in this sort of radical change that needs to happen within the arts. And, you know, I think we, especially with South Asian dance forms, you know, we are very much, you know, training wise and the way we perform, it's very much a theatre or a setting based art form. So I think we all kind of need to think. So in terms of academy, I came in and then suddenly obviously all of this was happening, and my first, I had two primary concerns. Number one, the artists. What can we do to make sure we don't lose our sector? We have a tiny sector. There are so few of us who create work or work in the forms that we know and that are our forms. And for me, it was really important that the artists were supported as much as possible. And number two, it's the participants who we work with. You know, we don't just make dance work, but we work in hospitals, we work in care homes, we work in special needs settings, we work in all of these places where we take our dance forms to all of these people to give them something, you know, physical exercise, joy, a way of being, a way of moving that's different to their everyday lives. Now, suddenly, if you imagine everything is taken away from them, you know, there's nothing. So the care homes, you don't have visitors, you have no dance anymore, you have nothing. You know, the children with special needs and the profoundly autistic children we work with in 3 different schools suddenly have none of that, which is a huge part of their being. So my primary aim was actually, how do I recognize this? So the first thing we actually looked at was participants, because the artists are directly involved. So we work with about 8 artists who we employ regularly and provide employment for. And the first thing we needed to do was stop that. So it was a case of, well, how do we keep these artists employed? We cannot take their money away. It's their livelihood. What do we do? So we've been working constantly with the trusts and foundations, with the different settings, to see how can we provide our form as a means of enjoyment in some way, as a means of movement, well-being. So we've been working with these artists constantly. We've kept them employed all through this period. We have made very bespoke kind of videos and stuff. So the artists are still making work and doing the workshops, but we're kind of sending them in a bespoke way to all of these settings. That was the first thing. And then the other thing is, actually, you know, I'm starting to learn that the models of existence of our artists is quite complex. We are all not, in our own ways, making our living entirely necessarily from the arts. There are artists who make work, but also have other jobs. There are artists for whom this is their lives. Their livelihood comes from their art. So for me, it was trying to get an understanding of how I can collaboratively work with artists to support them during this time. So that's been my big thing. And as an artist myself, I know what stops first is thinking time. When there's no money, you have no time to think. When there's no money, you don't have time to play, because it's about living. So once I kind of had that idea and figured out what to do, we put out some seed commissions for artists. It wasn't a huge amount of money. It was only £500. That's all we could do. But we tried to support artists to give them time to think about ideas, but engaging for the future. So it wasn't about going to make, it wasn't just digital. Actually, how can we re-envisage, rethink the way in which we make work? So we've put out loads of seed commissions, some training bursaries to do some of our Learning Participation Workers Academy. And we're continuing to do this. That's all I do every day at the moment, is trying to find ways to keep our artists, our industry alive out there as much as possible. So yeah, that's what's been doing. And as an artist, I know that if I was in an academy, this would be me. You know, this would be me needing to think, needing time to make, not feeling, because I don't want our form not to be in all of those places. You know, they should be everywhere, in museums, in schools, in theatres, everything. But we collectively need to rethink what that feels like. I think all of us need to do that. And it's trying, so I'm sitting in on loads and loads of big discussions around it. So I'm part of this program called Culture Reset, which is, you know, an incredible program. So it's artists from all walks of life, really, talking about the radical change that's needed. And I hope that I can bring whatever the discussions are and their learning to our sector. And there are a few of us within our tiny sector who are part of it. So yeah,
wonderful. Yes, wonderful. And I'm sure that we are going to see wonderful flowering and fruiting of all the seeds that you're planting now, because this really is a time, like you say, for the whole sector and the wider arts industry to really, I think, look very, very honestly at what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to change. So Maryam, let's come to you. Can you tell us what have you been doing in lockdown? How's it been for you?
So it's been quite varied. I've had I think I've had 3 distinct phases. So phase 1 was just stopped everything. So it was quite emotionally turbulent when lockdown first started, and I lost all impulse to dance. It was, you know, I'd gone from, you know, pre-lockdown, it was, you know, I was like on some kind of, so much was happening in terms of kind of ODC projects and, you know, ODC festival at the Bhavan that we were organising. So it went from like going at full force to like absolutely nothing. So it was quite difficult. But then I think, you know, I'm quite fortunate personally that I have a part-time job that I have that has not been affected by lockdown. And so what Subbaiah was saying about how, you know, thinking time is the first thing that's lost, I feel like I've been quite fortunate in that I've suddenly, because I haven't had to, all of the dance stopped, I suddenly actually had a lot more time to think. So that's been quite an interesting process, because also typically I do spend a lot of my time training, and all of a sudden that suddenly stopped because I couldn't go to the studio anymore, and you know, I lost that impulse. So it's been quite interesting because I feel like that, you know, you still have the energy, however. So, you know, one of the things that I did right in the early days of the lockdown, I organized this Don't Rush challenge thing. So I think there was maybe 16 of us dancers, and we kind of did this thing where you suddenly transform from like no makeup to like full traditional wear, and like, so that was one of those little online challenges that was going, which was quite fun. But I do feel like things are brewing, like things are kind of starting to generate, like in terms of what I want to, where I want my kind of dance direction to be going in the future, because I feel like it's something that I've had in the background thinking, okay, like where do I really want to go? Where do I want to put my energy? What direction do I want to move into? But when you're kind of in the throes of like, you know, one thing after another, and, you know, work life, personal life, dance life, just everything is just constantly rolling. And often, you know, in London, we really are in that 1 week after another, just like go, go, go. So I feel like it's been quite a blessing. I feel like things are starting to kind of come up to the surface, and, you know, ideas are starting to form. It's kind of still very early stages, like some seeds, but I almost feel like sometimes it takes a few months actually out of a normal rhythm for new things to kind of emerge, and to really be able to step back and have that bigger perspective about everything. So yeah, it's been quite interesting. Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. It sounds like things are mulching, and I think that that's actually a very good way of looking at it, and I think that's been the case for a lot of people, this sort of mulching time, you know, things growing slowly, still in the dark, you know, under the soil, but they will start to grow and to flower. So I'm just going to do a time check. I do want to look at, there's one other big question I want to ask you all before I ask you for your sort of top tips for young dancers. Before we do that, who else would like to jump in? I'd really like to hear, especially if someone has specific plans, and if you've managed to make concrete plans for the rest of the year. I'd love to hear about that. Amina.
Okay, so I'm going very, very fast. I had quite a few strands to this lockdown. Obviously, it's very unfortunate with all the deaths happening around us. It's you know, for some, it's been quite a difficult time. So I'm trying to look at that. And I know Bangladesh and communities has been affected by the COVID as well. I haven't had any direct family members, but I've known people who have passed away through it. So it's been quite a strange times for sure. I had seven productions planned this year. Managed to do one, The Hum in My Heart, which was based on mental health in Britain. We performed that in February. Then I had three more pieces was going to be performed, which I was kind of transitioning into choreographer to make me work on other dances. And then I was going to go to Edinburgh, doing my solo work for a whole month, and another piece on another dancer, so 2 pieces. And then I had a 3-week run in London for another piece. So it's quite a lot I kind of has to put away. But when that was happening, there was a moment I felt, okay, this is the time for me to rest, because I haven't had a rest for the last 10 years. Then when the lockdown happened, I just immediately thought, oh my God, I perform all the time regularly, all the time throughout the year. How am I going to maintain my body if I'm not performing? How am I going to maintain that same kind of energy, same level of kind of, same level of, I suppose, performance level? So in the end, I just made my space. I have a little studio, but I even made it even bigger and just started practicing day and night. So my practice is from morning. I'm not a very morning person, but probably starts at 10, 11, all the way to about 3, 4, 5 o'clock. That's my practice all day, every day, just to keep my energy, my stamina intact. Then I was fortunate enough to also get emergency funding from Arts Council. So I'm making a film responding to the domestic violence, particularly with women, rise of it. So looking at that, but it's going to be a different type of movie. It's not a documentary. It's an animated film, so I just been filming that for last God knows how long. It's just been on editing phase at this moment. But importantly, what I also did, I work with a lot of women, marginalized women, dysfunctionalized women who are totally have no contact with the outside world anyway. So through the work I've been doing over the last 15 years, I have been in contact with the same women actually over the years, who I've worked with during my productions. I'm researching material for my work, for the piece I'm creating on stage, and then post-production, I go and speak to them and they come and see the show as well. So I interaction with them after that about how they thought about the project and how they found, because it's their story I tell, end of the day. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to reach out to them during lockdown. So instead of me just kind of, improving myself, I also decided to reach out. And the way I did that is I gave them send them lots of videos, which was again a challenging for me. I've never made video of myself on my own and talking to the women group. So I made videos of myself, messages, as well as movements, as well as exercises for them regularly. Created a WhatsApp group because that's the only thing they can connect. They're not savvy with technology. So all of that stuff. So that's what I'm still doing. I'm still keeping in touch with them, and I'm creating an online project where, again, these women can't be seen on social media because that's not their interest is not to be seen. So it's everything behind closed door. So because of that, and because of all the outreach work I've done in the last 15 years, I'm also writing a book on that subject.
Wow, you've done a lot. You've been really busy.
Well, actually, I thought I was going to rest, but I haven't rested at all.
Yeah.
But rest. It's like the performance pressure is different to doing everything in this way, where you're home, you're running everything from home. But so in that way, I think I felt blessed to have all the time to do what I couldn't do before. Didn't have the time to do before. Plus, I have a young child as well, so that takes a lot of energy.
Yes.
Homeschooling happened as well. So it's, I think, all of those things, the film, the shows, the Coco Soul, reaching out to the women, it has really kept me busy, and it has kept everything positive in a way. And I think reaching out to the women was the most important for me, and highlight for this whole lockdown is that they responded in a way that they would not go on to telephone, they would not use telephone or technology. So I'm making them use technology, which is another step going forward with how they think, and I'm bringing them, into a world that they've never been to. So that, I think that was quite exciting for me, and I was worried that they may not, and made me sad because they won't be able to come on social media or use technology in the way that we all can, and that's been developed. So that's been quite, emotional for me to see growth in those women happening.
That's really wonderful. I mean, that is inspiring to hear how you have continued to impact others with your dance and found innovative ways of doing that. Arunima, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just take a minute to talk about what happened in March, and then to answer the second part of your question as to what the plan is. So I think for the first time in my life as an artist, I'm a full-time artist. I don't have another career. I don't have another job. This is what I do. I'm a dancer, I teach, and I create work. For the first time, I felt really alone. I felt that, yes, even though we are a very tiny sector, there is, you knock on many doors, and there are very, very few doors that are there for you. So, suddenly from this, you have an ecosystem, but in times like this, you are the only one in it. So I think I realized that it was my darkest hour, as I call it. All performances cancelled, everything cancelled. And financially, it was horrible. I mean, I had to rely on my husband's earning as a self-respecting independent woman. I don't like that. So I was really upset. But I think from then on, I did, manage to get a grant, and that started off my work. I created a whole plan for the future. And I said, okay, I'm not going to knock on any doors which are not going to open for me. We'll just go, we'll write to everybody we know and try and see where we can actually make a difference. So I started creating a lot of online work, and like Amina, we do a lot of work with specially abled children. So we were able to do some work for them. And I did a lot of work with children. So all the classes that I take, I move them online. And through those, and I did a lot of master classes, free master classes. And I think through that, I got a lot of new students, and I charged them a very subsidized rate. But then because of the scale, you know, people reached out to us from all over the world, like from America, Poland, Italy, and it was wonderful to just, you know, share the joy. And now we are culminating that in a festival called Ekatra Dance for All, which is going to premiere on 15th of August in partnership with Bhavan. So all the work that we have done online with children, with old people, with mothers, anybody who wanted to dance. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be, you know, of course, anything to do with, you know, how I work on a stage performance, you know, looking at everything end to end. No, just come and dance. You know, whatever you have learned, whatever has made you happy, and share the joy. So that is on 15th August. We did a lot of sessions with Bhavan. It was incredible, the power of technology, because, you know, I realized, okay, you know, in a class you have 10 people, but online you have like 25,000 people watching. So the pressure on engaging an audience was absolutely enormous. So, you know, you are the brand, you are the ambassador of what you're creating and how you can engage. So I think that was a huge learning for me. And then, you know, we built a partnership. We have a partnership with Dance West. We're doing a choreography challenge. I built a partnership with One Dance UK. We won the competition. So for me, I think there were a lot of avenues I would have never, ever explored, which opened up. We have also partnered with a travel company. So because people can't physically travel, we're developing immersive experiences with them through Indian art. So, and these are, you know, these are financially sustainable. So I've created a mix of, you know, things that I would do free, and then things and then of course your own practice, and then things which, you know, might result in some kind of you know, money at the end of it, because, you know, in order to be sustainable, that's what you need to do. We're also working on a project with you know, Shakespeare, and we just filmed it this week. So small snippets of what we can do, but again, really extending and trying to extend the portfolio.
This is brilliant, absolutely wonderful. Now we are going to have to wrap up very soon, but Mathangi, I just want to ask you, because you're working on Chinna Devi, on this new project as a dancer, and you're doing many things. And I know you guys have started already working in physical spaces. Can you tell us, how is it dancing with social distance?
Yeah, so luckily, so again, Chinna Devi was meant to be a live performance, and given, you know, the situation, we were like, okay, what do we do with it? We were like, right, let's make a dance film. So we started really working on that, and we've literally completed the film shooting over the weekend, and we kept the group quite small. Of course, this is Dr. Chamu Kuppuswamy's production, so the group was very small. It was literally just she and I who were dancers. We had one makeup artist who had a full gear on with masks and everything. We had the film crew who were also all masked up. And again, there were not too many of them. So I think we were in total about 6 of us in Strawberry Studios. That's where we shot the film. It was really nice actually to be with people. And but I want to say we did try and maintain the distance, but I'm pretty sure at some point, you know, when you're working 3 days, morning to evening, yeah, at some points it did go kind of go out of the window. But yeah, initially we were all masked up and, you know, respected. But of course, there was absolutely no hugging or any of that. So yeah.
Wonderful. So it's
food and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this kind of adaptability is, I think, is just now part of the new normal. That's where it's at. So the other big question I want to come into, but if we can just answer it, I'd like actually all of you to answer this, but quite briefly. And it's about fitness and body conditioning and body care for dancers, because I feel this is such a huge issue for all classically trained Indian dancers, because we're not really taught about that. I think it's a big gap. What do each of you do to look after your body? How do you cross train? Let's just go across. Arunima, let's start with you.
So this is for the first time in my life, I've done so much yoga. I always want to do yoga, but I never have the time, and now I had no excuse. So lot of yoga, and I see the benefits. And then I also love HIIT. So I love the high intensity trainings. I've done a few of the insanity workouts. Let's see where it takes my knees. And I also discovered the joy for running. So I got these AirPods for my birthday from my husband, and because I'm always on the phone or on the computer, so I just love running now, and I think that's my new thing. So that's how I'm trying to keep fit. And yes, lots of dancing, but it's difficult to just be packed in a room and just kind of do it on your own. So I've done a lot of it, and I think the festival has inspired me, and the classes have inspired me to kind of dress up and be in front of a computer and dance. So I think that's how I've done it.
Wonderful. Maryam, what about you? How do you cross train? What other things do you do to look after your body?
So I integrate a yoga practice into my dance training as well. So I always start with like about a 40-minute yoga session, and then I'll go into a 30-minute like ODC drill set that we have, then choreography, and then I'll do about 20-minute, half an hour yoga to cool down. So that's kind of my typical training session. So, and it works really well. Like I don't have any knee pain. Amazing.
That's brilliant. That's fantastic.
That's my usual training that I would do also in a studio. Since lockdown, because I can't do full dancing in my flat, so I have actually been doing a lot more bar classes, Pilates classes as well. So that's been quite amazing. So I've really kind of been building my core strength and just finding new ways to be body conditioning, and that's something that I think I want to take forward after lockdown, once kind of everything goes back to normal. Let's see how long that takes, because I think I realized that when we spend so much time, we can spend so much time just training, and that the more time that you just spend training, that actually cuts out of creative time. So if I can be more effective in how I train and build my strength and body conditioning, then that can actually open up a lot more creative time. So this is kind of some of the things that I'm piecing together over lockdown.
Wonderful. The core strength is really important. Stella, what about you? What do you do?
I am a yoga practitioner through and through. So,
fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Subbaiah, what about you?
I just think at this time, actually, but all of our mental and physical well-being has come into question. It's not just the physical stuff, it's actually the mental well-being. And what I found, so I do a lot, I run a lot of HIIT sessions, yoga, just a mixture of stuff, because otherwise I get bored. Because you just in one place, Groundhog Day can only sort of go on for so long. So I think just to keep my brain active and alive, I'm blessed with a tiny studio space, so I sometimes, when I can, and I'm not working, delve into audiobooks, but otherwise it's actually just been, physical activity has been a real lifesaver in terms of physical and mental well-being. And I have a little boy, so we've been doing the Joe Wicks workout religiously. Man, that guy is amazing. So we've been, sorry Joe Wicks, I know everybody plugs Joe Wicks, so that's fine. But literally every morning we had a routine, we'd wake up, we'd do Joe Wicks for half an hour, and my goodness, if we did his stuff, woo, it's hard. So yeah, go Joe Wicks.
Wonderful. Amina, what about you?
Well, I've always run. Running was my thing from ever since a year before. I think I did my run profesh. I started running, and it must have been last like 15-20 years nearly I've been running. So obviously I couldn't go running at the beginning, so I was doing a lot of skipping. So I'm intense skipping for about 10-15 minutes. Then when I could go running, I went running. So I go running now. I also do part of my kind of normal practice anyway. I do weight training. I don't do that much of a HIIT because I think the jogging and the skipping really does give you, it's quite intense, so it gives you a lot of stamina anyway. And most importantly, after I do my jogging and running, I do a 1 hour of stretch. That's really important, because I feel like those kind of exercises can sometimes stiffen your muscles and your body. So stretching is something that we don't often do enough. We do a little bit, like stretch your arm up and then go away. But so I decided this time, like, really spend a lot of time stretching. So, and of course my usual footwork practice that can go on for ages unless I get distracted by my family. But that every day that has to happen.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Mathangi, what about you?
I'll keep it quick. So I think 3 things for me. Firstly, running is my new religion, and I'm borrowing my cousin's words when I say this. So I've literally, ever since lockdowns, really started learning how to run, let me be clear, because I just didn't know how to run. I could dance, but I didn't know how to run. So it's really, really good. And I'm actually seeing the benefits of it in the last 3-4 months. Second of all, I learned it the hard way, but I've really started focusing on my quads. Because I realized they were quite weak, and that's what was giving me knee pains, because I did meet a physio earlier last year. So yeah, really training, making sure that they are strengthened. And third thing, would you believe it, over the lockdown, I've had some angels come out of nowhere. Like Shantaka would every evening at 3 p.m. come on Skype with me, and I would practice in front of her. And she taught me something, I taught her something. So it's really, I did find that during this lockdown, the community came closer, and I've had some wonderful people helping me through. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we're going to wrap up. So let's wrap up on this note. I'd like each of you, please, to share your top tip, just one tip for young dancers who want a successful dance career. They want to forge a successful dance career. Let's start. Amina, we'll go the other way. Amina, you go first.
Okay, very quickly. Firstly, I think it's really important to know the history of what's been already done, not done. Because I'm actually getting quite frustrated with lots of stuff coming up saying, oh, I've done it for the first time, I did it for the first time. But there has been work from the 90s onward in this country, even earlier, work has been done, and I feel like people are repeating them now without knowing that it's already been done. And I think that's really important to know. Of course, you can make the same work, but you find your own way of doing it, not just blatantly copying. So this is one area I really feel strongly that people should know the history of the dance here in UK.
Yes.
And continue forward with that. Be inspired. Be definitely inspired by other dancers, other artists around there. I am inspired by a lot of artists. But try to find your own kind of pathway for it, including, ideas for creating movement, music, kind of work you do. Sorry, I've got a few more. Believe in yourself, believe in what you do. No matter how many obstacles you get in your way, carry on, because you will, if you persevere, result will come. And finally, please set up a company before you've danced enough. Don't set up a company unless you've danced enough. Dance, perform, because performance give you the ultimate kind of, if you like, it's the quality, the thing you need in order to be able to engage to an audience, to grab the audience to your performance. And if you don't perform enough, if you don't have enough experience of performing, it's no point setting up a company. It's no point trying to make choreography work, because these things you have to learn through performances. And I think that's really important. So first and the last one is really important for me, is to perform anywhere, weddings, birth ceremonies, park, wherever it takes you, perform. Because when you perform in different environment, it gives you different kind of strength. You build strength with that. And I have to say, I must have done about nearly 1,000 performances like that before I set up my company.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amina. Stella, how about you? What's your tip? Top tip?
Right. I'll something which resonates with me, Martha Graham's, I'll just quote her, which I think it's really appropriate, which she says is, I am a dancer. I believe that we learn by practice, whether it means to learn to dance by practicing dancing or to learn to live by practicing living, the principles are the same.
Marvelous. Thank you very much. Beautifully succinct. Subha.
My advice would be learn to think outside the box, learn to incorporate possibly being entrepreneurial. If you're young, you're just coming out of a training program, the world is changing, we need to adapt to it. So the way to do that is to learn to think outside the box, and think entrepreneurial about your art form and your practice.
Wonderful, thank you. Mathangi, you next.
Sure. So the 3 would be A, identify what your strengths and weaknesses are, so you can sort of plan your strategy around your strengths, so you can play to your strengths. 2, network and build relationships within the industry, because in most cases, people collaborate with people they know. And 3, be genuine in whatever you do.
Thank you. Maryam.
So I would say practice and polish your kind of basic form. I think that's very key. What Mathangi said about working together. So I think working together is a huge, huge component, and trust that there is enough space for everyone. Because our work is actually to create space. So it's the essence of what we do. So trust in that. And just bask in dance, just enjoy it, and just let the beauty of dance fuel you.
Thank you. Arunima. You need to unmute yourself.
Don't stop moving, so keep going. It's hard, but keep going. It's a journey. Don't be myopic, so don't focus on short-term, goals. Think about the long-term and why you're in it, and enjoy that. And then make informed choices. So whatever your choice, have information behind it. Whether you want to do solo or group, make informed choices and enjoy.
Wonderful, thank you all. And my tip would be, it's not so much about talent, it's about organization. So get yourself either an agent, a producer, or a manager. Get somebody out there, get your organizational structure in place, and that's what's going to carry you through. Thank you all so much for joining me for this panel conversation. It's been so rich, and there are so many gems in there. I think that people will come back and listen to this again and again and dip into it. And we really are, as we move forward, we're at such a creative space. I think that we can potentially see a real explosion in talent and content and productivity and flourishing in this industry. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful.